Welcome to the School of Bravery. My name is Emily Ann Peterson. I am a singer-songwriter and an author and the founder of the School of Bravery, and I'm so excited to have Leah Carey here with us today. She is the podcast host of Good Girls Talk About Sex.
Woohoo! Yes, we do.
Excited. Leah and I are in a podcasting group on Facebook of all these wonderful, powerful podcasting women, and we connected through that, and we were just chatting about some fun, exciting new things, and it became very clear that she should be on the podcast, on the School of Bravery podcast, for hopefully obvious reasons, but and if it's not obvious yet, you will find out in a very quick second. So thank you for being here with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I love what you're doing. People choose words for a year, and last year my word was perseverance. This year my word is boldness. So it feels like it's really appropriate to what we're doing here.
And before we started recording, Leah and I were laughing about the little thing behind her says, what does it say?
Be effing brave.
Be effing brave, yeah. It's so great. It's so great. So, okay, so what I know about your story is that you kind of did this like cross-country travel journey, and it included this like a sexual blossoming.
Yes.
Can you talk about what that was like, or how that came about, or what triggered that? Trigger may not be the right word, but yeah.
Well, so I need to back up a little bit to give you some backstory on how and why all of this happened. So I grew up in a home with an alcoholic and abusive father. He was emotionally abusive. He throughout my my tween years, which was not a thing then, but is a thing now, he told me that I was fat and ugly and no one would ever love me. And those messages sat pretty heavily with me. You know, when you're a 12-year-old girl and your dad tells you something like that, I was primed to believe it. And my dad, there was also a lot of weirdness around sexuality in my home. He was sexual with other people other than my mother in front of me. He talked to me about his sex life with my mom, and he commented sexually on my body. So it all left me really confused. And my response to that was to just shut all that down, to be like, nope, not dating, not flirting, not having sex, not kissing, not doing any of the things. I wanted to do all of the things, but I was scared and I didn't believe that any of them were available to me.
Yeah.
And that is how I spent my life through my early 40s. I did have a few relationships, nothing longer than 2 years, and most of them were with people who acted a lot like my dad, who were emotionally inappropriate with me, who, mirrored those messages about me being unlovable and unattractive and all of that. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of where we sit when I reach age 42, at which point my mom passed away, and she and I were very, very close. And so I had been living in northern New Hampshire this whole time. Well, I had left for a while, but then I had gone back, and I had spent like 15 years there because that's where she was, and I wanted to be near her. Had never been married, didn't have kids, etc. I was living a very safe life. But then she passed, and I didn't have any reason to stay in New Hampshire anymore. So that was when I decided I'm going to take some of the money I got from her estate and travel the country for, I didn't know, 6 months, a year, whatever, to try to find the next place that I want to live. That was my entire reason for doing this trip, was to find the next place I wanted to live, which, let me just say, on its own is massive.
Yeah, on its own, that like there are many people who don't even leave their own county for their
Yeah.
whole life. So the fact that you would be willing to just wander around the country.
Yeah. And
It,
it was this remarkable experience. I, I deal with a lot of anxiety. And when I was traveling, that was the first time I ever experienced the anxiety going quiet. Because even though all my entire life was unknowns, I didn't know where I was going to be sleeping 3 days from now, let alone a month from now. And I didn't know who I'd be meeting. And it was full of unknowns, but I didn't have any responsibility to any other person. And I'm such a perfectionist. I'm such a caretaker. I'm such a people pleaser. All of these are really common traits of adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. Um, and so I go out on the road and suddenly my brain gets quiet, or at least quieter than it had ever been. And in that space, my sexual awakening starts happening. And I joke that if I had known that was going to happen, I never would have left New Hampshire. Like I would still be huddling under the covers in a ball in New Hampshire because I didn't believe that I was capable of doing any of the things that I actually ended up doing.
that's
So,
hilarious.
thank goodness for not knowing.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, it all started with me. Um, I came to realize I had a lot of partners. I never had a lot of partners. So let me rephrase that. I had several partners who helped me to confirm my belief that I was broken sexually,
Right. Yeah.
that I didn't have sexual sensation. It was very, very difficult for me to orgasm. I often found sex boring, um, usually found sex boring, and somewhere between sometimes and often found sex painful.
Mhm.
Um, and I desperately wanted to have this amazing, wonderful sex life that I heard friends talking about that gets, portrayed on television. Two people look, there are sparks, they kiss, they have this magical moment, fireworks go off, and then we cut to them, post-coital in total bliss. I'm like, I want that. Why can't I have that? Um, and so I started to really think about it, and frankly, it was after my mom was gone, and I no longer had to worry about what anybody in my family was going to think of me.
Mm.
She and I
Mhm.
were very close, but I was still very loyal to all the old family stories and the old family patterns. So it
Mhm.
wasn't until after she was gone that I started really allowing myself to think about and wonder about, why don't I have sexual sensation?
I'm gonna pause you right there because
Yeah.
this month's theme or this month's ingredient that we're focusing on is context.
Yeah.
And the you brought up a couple points in your story that I think are really important um, for everyone. Like this is regardless of what your sexual and social blossoming is doing at the moment. Um, your family is your context for knowing
Yes.
how to, or is your context for starting to know how to engage with the rest of the world. And if your family had some quirks or issues or characteristics or characters, then to navigate around or whatever, then a lot of times that um, that extra energy that it takes to maneuver with those family dynamics ends up going with you throughout the rest of your life. And it just becomes innate and just kind of like a default,
Yes.
you know, go
It's
to.
like we don't even know that that's the air that we're breathing because it's just what we've always known.
Exactly. And I know
Yeah.
that with me and my, oh, ooh, here we go. Here we go. With me and my relationships, like romantic relationships, I know that I have, um, very often defaulted to reacting to a situation as if it was family members or
Yes.
In a family situation, which sometimes is great and sometimes it's not so great. So in the effort of talking about context and how to be brave, I find it really interesting that when you were free of the context of, or a constricting context,
Mm-hmm.
you were able to feel more expansive and safe to explore and
Yeah. And
yeah.
I think it's important for me to always acknowledge that there is some guilt for me in that.
Oh, yeah.
I miss my mom every day. She was my best friend. And I would not be where I am today doing what I'm doing if she were still here. And those are two ideas that are so in conflict. And yet I have to hold them both at the same time. And that can be really hard.
My friend Jenny just posted on Instagram something, and I'm going to find it right now because it was so good. It like threw me off completely off of my game today. She posts these daily haikus. She's a songwriter as well. And she said, getting what you want brings up all the grief around not having had it.
Oh, God.
Right?
Right? That's
Ah,
amazing.
Jenny,
Ah,
girlfriend.
Jenny, that's
So,
awesome.
yeah. So, so we can
Yeah.
unpause your story. Unpause.
Okay. So I'm suddenly starting to think about, like, why haven't I had sensation? Why has sex been, and I should say the pain is around the actual sexual intercourse. The lack of sensation is like, why am I not having any of the good feelings? Um, I literally, there has been a sense of sexual numbness that I think it's really important for women to hear, because I've heard so many people be like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was broken. So like, if I, if I press my arm against my boob, or if somebody bumps up against me, I can feel that. It's not like I have a lack of actual feeling receptors.
Yeah.
But when somebody would come to me sexually and begin stroking my breasts, they would be completely numb.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that that was an indicator that I was completely broken. Meanwhile, I have all of these sexual fantasies and all of these things that I want to try and experience. And I'm like, okay, so not only am I broken, I'm also a pervert. I'm also a total deviant. Because most of my fantasies lean toward the sort of like submissive, being dominated kind of thing. And I was like, well, clearly then there's something wrong with me. So I start reading, I start doing a lot of learning. And the first thing that I figure out is, no, it's not that I'm broken. Like, this pain that I've been having is not because I'm broken. It's because I've never actually been turned on by my partners. And therefore, I wasn't lubricating. And therefore, intercourse is really effing painful. And that is not something that gets talked about, because intercourse, when we're talking about a heterosexual couple, because that's mostly what gets talked about, um, the the conversation is all about the male pleasure. It's
Mm-hmm.
all about, like, when I talk to women about what does sex mean, there's a common question about, like, they say, well, it's when the man has an orgasm, because I don't always have an orgasm. So I guess it's when he has an orgasm. I'm like, so if the man doesn't have an orgasm, does that mean that you haven't had sex? Because clearly that's not true. But we're willing to say that the man's orgasm is our sort of definer or definition of whether sex has happened or not. Our entire cultural narrative around sex is about whether the male partner or the penis haver in the situation is satisfied. And so that was the first thing that I had to break down, was the idea that sex got to be as much about me as it was about my partner, male or female.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It is tragic how well, I'm trying to find the right word for it, but it is tragic how much patriarchy has like infiltrated every single thing in our world. And it's not just, it hasn't just made women victims sexually, it has also
Oh,
made men victims as well, you know, like,
absolutely.
because men want to feel soft and intimate and safe and comfortable as well, and you know, there's still a stigma around them entering into a bedroom environment and being like the strong dominant one,
Absolutely.
and like,
Yeah, like one
but
of
they
the
don't want to
things.
be that.
Right, right. One of the things I talk about a lot is how we were socialized as children. So I'm less interested in what your gender is as an adult than how you were socialized as a child. Those of us who were socialized as little girls were taught to, and this is going to be a broad generalization, but we're taught to be nurturing, to take care of other people, to put other people's needs first, to not ask for what we need, but more than that, often to not even know what it is we want or need. Those just were not questions that many of us were not asked those questions.
Mhm.
On the other hand, people who were socialized as little boys were taught that they needed to fix anything that went wrong, that they needed to know things without asking questions, and that they need to just sort of be the standard bearer in any situation. Well, you put those two people in a bedroom together, and you have one person who doesn't know how to identify their needs or speak up for them, advocate for them. You have another person who has been taught not to ask any questions. Of course, we're not communicating well in the bedroom. No one has been given any tools whatsoever. This
Yeah.
is not a males versus females or a all men are bad thing. This is, and we all got fucked up.
Yeah.
And we all have stuff we need to unlearn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so let's go
Yeah,
back a
yes.
little bit because we skipped to the end of the story, which
Yeah.
is like what a little bit of what the end of the story is, which is what you do today. But so you're on this crazy, wonderful, amazing
Yeah.
journey, and you're having this sexual enlightening, or the sexual like glimmering, I should say.
Yes. I like that. Yes.
So what next then?
So I'm traveling, I'm not staying there. There were some cities where I would stay for a couple of weeks, but I'm not staying most places more than a few nights. But I start to get brave and I start turning on my dating apps. And I actually went to Craigslist personals, which was still a thing because this was a couple years ago. And I started looking for experiences. I was like, like I had a very clear sense of how I was going to vet people. I wasn't just gonna, take any Tom, Dick, or Harry or Harriet, because I am bisexual and I was, entirely open to experiences with all genders. Um, so, uh, so I have a vetting process, but I start looking for experiences that I've always wanted to have, in all of my fantasies. When I was in my early 20s, so I should say I didn't have sex for the first time till I was 25. So I had a lot of years of dreaming about sex before I actually had it. Um, and when I was in my early 20s, a couple that I knew invited me for a threesome. And they were both people who I really liked, who I thought were attractive, who, like everything about it should have been a go, except that I had never had intercourse at that point. I was still a quote unquote virgin. And I thought, well, I can't have my first intercourse be during a threesome with somebody who I'm not involved with. And so I said no. It never occurred to me at that point that I could put boundaries on it and be like, yeah, I totally want to do this, but I don't want to have intercourse with the masculine partner. So I've spent, 20 years bemoaning the fact that I lost my opportunity to have a threesome. So I go onto Craigslist and I start looking for threesome opportunities.
That is, that is
And
so bold. That is, when it's bold and brave, like that is so brave.
And then I did a whole bunch of really out there kind of stuff. I went to a resort in Jamaica that is a nude sex resort. I went for 5 days by myself. I did not end up having any any sexual contact at all while I was there, which was totally fine. It was not my scene. I am not a partier, but but it allowed me to spend 5 days being nude on a beach with other nude people, which was massive in terms of me reorienting my body image, because I was surrounded by all of these people who were not, perfect size 6 bikini bodies. They were all over the map in terms of shape and size. And I realized, oh, these stories that I carry from my father about being fat and ugly, maybe they're not real. Because I thought if I take my clothes off, people are going to laugh at me and tell me to put my clothes back on, that I don't belong here.
Mhm.
But in fact, I totally fit right in with every other body on that beach. It was massive for me.
Yeah, that can be really
Um,
huge. I know
yeah.
one of the years that I went to Burning Man, I remember sitting with my friend Danny, and we were sitting in like the center community area of the city center, um, and I just remember turning to him and just going like, "Bodies are so cool. They're so beautiful." Like,
Right.
and I just looked at him. I was like, "Look at them all. Look at them." They're
Yes.
all so different and they're all so beautiful. Like, it's so crazy. And we get told by like porn or Hollywood or magazines or our parents or whatever that like just sameness, and that sameness is what is
Yeah.
beautiful. But
There is only one attractive body,
yeah.
and that is absolutely a lie. And
Mhm.
the reason we don't understand it is because we're not being exposed to other bodies. You know,
Context.
yeah, exactly. I
Mhm.
started watching a television show, thank goodness for Netflix. They have some Australian TV shows. And in Australia, they're not all size 6, or in Hollywood, they're size 0. But, like it's this one particular show I absolutely love called Offspring. Um, and the main character, she's attractive, but she's not this drop dead bombshell. And there are 2 women on that show who are women of size, who one of whom is an Aboriginal and the other one portrays a lesbian. And they are treated as fully sexual human beings, just like every other character. They get to have romances, they get to have flings, they get to be, have kids and go through breakups, the full range of human experience, even though they're in larger bodies. We
Mhm.
need so much more of that.
Mhm. Mhm. I mean, it's so I know that bravery is contagious and courage is contagious, and so that when you are putting when you are words, when you intentionally surround yourself in a context that makes your bravery feel easier, um, or makes your bravery feel contagious, or normalizes the thing that you are trying to do. And
Yes.
that could be like a business goal or a creative goal or a sexual goal, or, like whatever it is you want to try to accomplish. If the thing feels difficult or uncomfortable for some reason, if you basically do whatever you can to intentionally saturate yourself with like the fact that your brain hasn't quite adjusted to this new normal of doing this brave thing, it'll eventually get a lot easier. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I know
We don't know.
I have friends who've done that with social media and Instagram. Like, they unfollowed a lot of the like thin models and
Mm,
followed a ton of like the plus size curvy models.
yes.
So they just started getting a lot of Instagram then started just inundating them with like, oh, you must like a lot more of these ladies. And
Yeah.
so anytime they're on Instagram now, it's like just all these beautiful curvy ladies. And it's,
And that gets normalized for
yes,
you.
yes,
And then you begin to see that as beautiful.
yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So you're on this journey and you're
Yeah.
having these crazy, wonderful, Craigslist experiences.
And I do want to say that, so I had a group of female friends who I was sharing all these experiences with as they were happening. And they would regularly say to me, "Oh my God, you're so brave." And I would be like, "No, I am terrified out of my mind. This is not me being like, oh, I think I'll do X today. No, no, no. This is me being scared out of my mind,
Yeah.
but knowing that I wouldn't forgive myself if I didn't take the chance."
Mm.
So this whole, like, I got very touchy about the word brave for a while until I was reminded numerous times that bravery is about feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And that is very much what I was doing. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, but yeah, so this group of friends is actually very important to this story because as I had each experience, and this was going on for months, over the course of many months, as I had each experience, I would write about it for them. And we're a group of writers. And at first I was like, oh, they're going to think I'm weird. They're going to think that I'm crazy. They're going to reject me. They're going to laugh at me. All of those old stories about how this is not something that I'm allowed to do. Instead, what they did was say, oh my God, tell us more. I want to know everything. Tell us every dirty little detail. And as I told more and more of what was happening to me in greater and greater detail, they started coming back and telling me their stories and
Mm.
started asking me questions. And suddenly I oddly became sort of an expert because I was literally doing so much learning and so much soaking up of all of these things and taking classes um, and so they start sharing their stories with me, and I begin to realize we are all craving having these conversations about sex and sexuality, but we're so afraid of being told that we're broken or we're deviant or for whatever reason this isn't for us, that we don't actually have the conversations. And that was what led to me starting the podcast, Good Girls Talk About Sex, which is literally just each episode is a deep dive with one person, you know, uh, born female, cisgender female, trans male, non binary, sort of all across the gender spectrum with the exception of cis dudes. Um, so, but about their experience of female sexuality.
Mm. I mean, it's been really interesting. So because I've been working on a fun, exciting project for other podcasters, which is not really relevant to this episode, except for the fact that that's how Leah and I started talking. And how I started, like, I got in touch with a couple other podcasters who are in the, like, we'll say the sexual education umbrella, right? And I've listened to several episodes from each of y'all's podcasts, and it's been so wonderful to hear how the different personalities have come through each podcast.
Mm.
And so, you've got like um, so one, so Sunny Megatron she does the American Sex
American Sex Podcast.
podcast. And then I have another friend, Erin McLaughlin, she hosts the Girl Boner podcast. And then you with Good Girls Talk About Sex. And so each of those shows has a very different personality. The hosts obviously have a lot to do with that. But what I really appreciate about your show is how soft it felt and how careful and tender it felt. So, like,
Mm.
there's some of the shows are like, yeah, let's just have fun and play, right? But yours felt very much like, this is sacred, let's be tender, let's talk about this. And I think that there, for people who have had, for people who walk with baggage, sometimes you need a tender, safe place to put that baggage
Yeah.
before you're willing to like release it a little bit, even if
Oh,
it's just
yeah.
for 45 minutes to listen to an episode, and then you can pick it back up and walk away, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And going back to the conversation, thank you.
Yeah.
That means a lot to me. um, Going back to the conversation we were just having about normalizing things, that is one of my biggest goals with this, is to present all different types of experiences so that they can be normalized for people. Whether it's the person who really has been dreaming about getting into kink and is afraid that that is just a bridge too far, to hear other women talking about kink and recognizing, oh, this is something people actually do, and they sound normal. They don't sound like crazed sex pots.
Mhm.
um, or if it's somebody who's like, I've had a lot of trauma, and I don't really feel good about sex, and this is really hard for me, to hear other women telling that story so that they can hear that reflected back and know that they're not the only ones struggling with this. It's really important to me to show all of the different aspects of sexuality and sexual experience, so that, the biggest question that I get from people is, am I normal? I want X, am I normal? I feel Y, am I normal? All of that. And that's really my goal, is to normalize all of it. Because as I say frequently, as long as you are not wanting to hurt someone without their consent, what you want is normal. Your only goal is to find somebody who's willing to participate in it with you.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to have you be part of the School of Bravery a little bit more frequently, because I think that that's going to be a very beautiful pairing, and something that I just think it's something that, would be really, really wonderful. So I'm excited about that. The reason why is because Leah is an expert at communication. Like, yes, we've been talking about sex for the last 40 minutes or whatever, but more than that, she is a communication expert. So when we have been discussing anything regarding bravery, a lot of times what has come up, especially with relational bravery outside of the bedroom, a lot of times that involves communication. So I think it'll be really, really wonderful to have you um, part of our community, and available to just kind of chime in and say, hey, here's
Yeah.
here's an idea. you know?
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I talk about is that, we think of sex as this big physical act. I would suggest that sex is only about 10% the
Mhm.
physical act. The other 90% is our communication about what we want to do, what we don't want to do, what we're scared of, what we're triggered by, what we're excited about, like all of that, all of our baggage, all of our turn ons and turn offs, and all of that. Because it's a well-known thing at this point that the brain is the biggest sexual organ. All of that stuff is happening in our brain while someone is touching our body.
Mhm.
What's going on with the touch of our body is only a small portion of how we experience sex.
Right, right. And that the ability to communicate with someone in a brave way,
It's
in a
huge.
sexual way, is
It's the whole
wonderful.
ball game.
That's great. But also, like, that ability to communicate in a brave way to an employee, or to a superior or supervisor, or to a collaborator, a creative collaborator, or something like that, or to a neighbor. Like, those are things that um, one, our society needs more of, but two, I know that our students need a lot more of. So, and so there, I'm
Yeah.
just excited.
And you know, I something that I hear frequently from the people that I work with is, you know, I came to you to learn how to be braver in the bedroom, to communicate better in the bedroom. What I'm finding is that these skills are transferring and I'm using them at work too. They are completely interchangeable. It's all the same skill set.
Brilliant.
So you can practice it in either place and strengthen it in both.
Here we are talking about context again, right?
Yes.
If you are curious more about what Leah is doing, I would highly recommend you just go check out some of those episodes of Good Girls Talk About Sex and scroll through some of them and pick one that sparks something, because I have a feeling that it will spark other things as well.
Yes.
And I thank you so much for joining us and being here with us. And we'll hear a lot more from you in the future. I know it. I just know it.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Yay! Yay! Awesome. So we'll see you soon.
Okay, great.